Hello and welcome to the Guitar Hang Podcast. I'm your host, Jon Stankorb. Well, it's Season 11, Episode 3. This week I'm joined by two of the most respected voices in guitar journalism, Gill and Brad Tolinski, to celebrate their outstanding new book, Blow by Blow, a deeply researched and beautifully written biography of the one and only Jeff Beck. We'll explore Beck's relentless creativity, his fearless approach to tone, technique, and expression, and why decades later his influence continues to inspire guitarists across every genre. If you've ever been captivated by Jeff Beck's ability to make a guitar sing, this is a conversation you won't want to miss. Before we jump in, don't forget to check out the Woodshed Guitar Experience, an incredible weekend where guitar players of all levels learn from world-class instructors, make lifelong friends, and immerse themselves in everything guitar. We hope to see you there. And now my conversation with Gill and Brad Tolinski. What period of time was this collected over? I know that there's probably individually you've had multiple encounters with Jeff, but when you set out to do the book, was this posthumously, or was it something that was a work in progress and he happened to pass in the making of the book?
I think that, as with the Van Halen book that Chris and I collaborated on, we could say that we wrote, with the Jeff Beck book, you could say that we wrote the book in 3 years, but then again, you could probably say we wrote it in 20 years.
Yeah.
Because of, both Chris and I have a history with Jeff that goes way back. And I think when he passed away, though, Chris and I had this discussion, like, has there been any really good book on Jeff written? And we both agreed that there hadn't. There have been books, and they've been decent, but I don't think anybody's really gone into a great deal of depth or spoke to Jeff as much as we did. And we've sort of felt some sort of responsibility for that. There's actually a great quote, that Chris suggested that we use at the very beginning of the book, where Jeff basically says, I tried to write an autobiography at one point, and then I just decided to let some other poor fools do it. And we were just
sounds like us. Hey,
we were just the fools to do it.
Yeah, he had such a unique perspective on his playing, maybe not unlike Alan Holdsworth, such a self-deprecating kind of like, I'm trying to get better. It's very fascinating to think about how he heard his playing, and I don't really think it was some false modesty. I think he genuinely felt like he was always reaching for something that was just slightly out of his grasp, but to the rest of us, to all of us guitar players, he was reinventing himself every 8 to 10 years and doing something completely new and fresh, and like, holy shit, those notes are not available on our guitar. Those sounds are not available to us.
Yeah.
So for us, it was amazing to hear what he was doing and changing and evolving. No, I can't think of a single player that has done that has changed in an upward trajectory.
Yeah, he's really unique in that respect. I will add to what Brad was saying earlier that, Brad had bugged me before we even did the Van Halen book together to do a Jeff Beck book. And I'm like, I don't think I have enough material because his career was so long, and it was so multifaceted. I mean, you just start off with the Yardbirds, this amazingly influential band. The Yardbirds gets this credit for being, the home of Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, and Jimmy Page, but they were more than just that. They also really were revolutionary in the style of music that they were doing, and especially when Jeff came into the band, the sounds that they were creating was very revolutionary. Well, then Jeff goes out and he forms the Jeff Beck group, and he revolutionizes again, and then, he forms the second version of the Jeff Beck group, and then he goes off in this funk direction, and then he goes off as a solo artist and does jazz. I mean, he goes on and on and on, where he does keep on pushing and changing. I think maybe that makes him a little bit different than someone like an Alan Holdsworth, for example, who is very focused on his style.
Right.
But there was something that Jeff had in common with a lot of virtuoso players that I've talked to over the years, including Danny Gatton and Eric Johnson, where, what comes out of their fingers and hands isn't what they hear up here, and they're frustrated by that, and they feel this limitation. I think Jeff probably came the closest to transcending the instrument and pulling these incredible sounds that he heard, and mimicking things, whether it's birds or Indian singers or the Bulgarian women's choir, or you name it, or an opera singer. It's like he could really accomplish these amazing things that were well beyond the fretboard. And I think that was really a part of his whole progress all along.
Yeah. Coincidentally, I just happened to stumble across a quote that Joe Bonamassa had, a little video clip, and Joe was saying the time that he had spent doing shows with Jeff, the real show was the backstage thing. He was practicing 6 hours or just jamming or just I don't know, it was practicing. I think it was just him playing, and he said the sounds that were emanating from the back, it was just otherworldly. He said, he'd never heard anything quite like that. And some of the things may have made it onto the stage that night or later, but he just clearly had a portal to something else, to something that most people don't have, that gift. I know it's a lot of work, and there's a lot of time, a whole lifetime put into his craft, but it just seems otherworldly, much like an Eric Johnson or John McLaughlin, Alan Holdsworth.
Sort of a cliche about Jeff was something about, something like, he wanted to try to imitate the human voice in terms of expressiveness, and range on the guitar. But, I've been thinking about that because a number of people brought that up, and I don't think Jeff ever wanted the guitar to actually imitate the human voice. I think he wanted to surpass it. Every bend, harmonic volume swell, touch of the whammy bar, expanded what the listener believed that the electric guitar could communicate.
Yeah.
There was another cliche about Jeff, too, that we ran into often when we were doing our research, that, Jeff went off and he worked on his hot rods and didn't really do anything musical. And he always had a guitar at hand. If you talk to anyone who knew him, and I'd spoken with a few people that just said, every room of his house had a guitar in it. And even one ex-girlfriend who didn't really want to be involved with the book had said that, during a meal, he would sit there with his guitar on his lap and his plate of food in front of him, and he'd be playing in between bites of eating. That's like how dedicated he was to it. And even when he was working on the hot rods, he would come in from the garage and pick up a guitar right away. It's like the first thing he'd do, open the door and then pick up the guitar. So he was always working on music, and there's all these musical projects, of course, that we don't know about, all these unreleased albums, and side projects and things that he had going on that was probably more than actually what he released. Yeah. So there was always a lot of music going on throughout his entire career.
Yeah.
I just read a thing. I just read a thing recently where Narda, Michael Walden, said that he's got a whole album of material with Jeff that nobody's ever heard or probably will never be released.
Yeah, and then Luke's got one. Narada, Michael Walden's got. Yeah, it's. One thing I wanted to ask you guys, and the two of you would be experts on this, I suspect. Jeff's origin story is so unique in the fact that he was a very young kid, right on the heels of World War II being over. Very bleak, very post-World War II, industrial, still rubble on the ground. Not a lot of things to be excited about, except for rock and roll. So rock and roll comes around, whether it's Cliff Gallup or Gene Vincent or Buddy Holly, whoever he may have been into. But the drive and the passion, it seems like it all started from a guy who didn't have a whole hell of a lot going for him just because of where he came up. Interestingly, he's in the same area essentially as Jimmy and Eric. But all of those guys, I guess the through line is they're so desperate to get out of where they came from, and they just loved rock and roll and loved the blues, and it was just interesting how Jeff never lost that hunger. It seemed like he was always hungry to get to something new and fresh. And I was just curious if in your research, what you
is like. I'm sorry, John.
No, go ahead. That's all I had.
I was going to say, when I look back, I mean, I could tell like you're probably around our age.
Yeah.
Even when I was a kid, okay, you had 3 channels on TV, maybe.
That's it. Yeah.
And most of it was like awful, and there weren't the distractions. So even when I was a kid, say during the 60s and 70s, rock and roll was so important. It was one of the few things that you had as a young guy that was cool. I
Absolutely. Right.
There were sports, but that's why, like, a new Pink Floyd record comes out and you're like, holy cats, I've got to have it now, and that would be the next, 2 or 3 months of your life, or a new Led Zeppelin record, or a new Jeff Beck record. Now, in his day, there was even less,
Less, right.
So rock and roll had that sort of huge impact on us. You can only imagine hearing, a Buddy Guy or Cliff Gallup or Les Paul. I mean, it was like a major explosion.
Yeah.
I think the thing, too, with Jeff is, like, it was just the timing of it all. I mean, we talk about how this movie, The Girl Can't Help It, has such a major impact on Jeff and his future. And he was just the right age. He's just entering his teen years, And it's like, my gosh, that's the whole package right there. You've got Jane Mansfield. There goes the hormones. Right. You've got Gene Vincent and these hoodlum-looking guys, and there's the aggression, and everything. Then you've got these really cool American cars. I mean, that sums it all up. That's the life path, like right there.
And you have guitars.
And guitars, of course, and guitars. And guitars were the avenue to getting the cars and the girl.
Yeah. As a young guy, you're not going to get Jane Mansfield, and you're not going to be able to drive the car. Maybe you can get the guitar, though.
True. But that's the thing. And if you get the guitar and you get good, then you get all that other stuff. So, But another thing I wanted to mention, too, that you mentioned about that hunger was that, it may be the best thing that Jeff didn't have the success of an Eric Clapton or a Jimmy Page. He did have success with Blow by Blow and Wired that pretty much had him set for the rest of his life. But it wasn't like a huge amount of money. He still had to go out and earn a living. Yeah. Now, he did a little bit better than most people, and a lot of musicians he worked with fell by the wayside because Jeff was better off than them. But at the same time, he still had that hunger and drive, and I think if he had some huge, diamond platinum album or something like that, he would have been every bit as reclusive as Jimmy Page was during the 80s and, God knows how long, So I think in a way it was kind of a good thing that he got just popular enough, to live a comfortable lifestyle, but not so much that he lost his ambition.
Yeah. Maybe you could speak a little bit about some of the ways that he was always looking to bring new faces, maybe some unseen faces into the mix with some of the later bands, some of the female musicians that he worked with, some of the young, the bass players, keyboard player. It seems like he was always introducing some really incredible talent into the fold, which was, kind of uncommon for some of the marquee legend or legacy players.
Mm-hmm.
I did an interview that's in the book with that might surprise some people, with the great British folk rocker Donovan.
Yeah, okay.
And Jeff had actually played on one of Donovan's records.
Yeah.
And they knew each other quite well. But Donovan, man, I don't know how old he is, but he's like a freaking teenager when he starts talking about music. And he actually had a really interesting comparison. He compared Jeff to like Duke Ellington, like a big band leader.
Yeah.
Like a person who was a great instrumentalist, but needed to surround himself with other talented people in order to have commercial breakthrough, you know.
Yeah.
And Chris and I have talked about this a lot. You know, he was built a little different, like most rock bands, right? They get their they get their gang together, they're 4 or 5 guys, and they stay together for the next 20 some years or however long until they can't stand each other. And then, but Jeff, on the other hand, was more like a jazz guy or a big band leader. He was always looking for like some fresh infusion of blood, something that would inspire him. And also, you know, singers and players that would help maybe make his music a little bit more commercial and bring it to the masses too.
Yeah.
He was very mercurial. I mean, it's just, I think his own interest, you know, changed, and it was hard to find a group of people that could keep up with him as his tastes changed.
Yeah.
And, but then at the same time, there was also the case of where there were certain bands that he wanted to keep together, which you'll read about in the book. And they just, you know, said like they couldn't deal with it. You know, they couldn't deal with his terms, or, you know, just sometimes, you know, Jeff would go through periods where he wasn't really as committed as he needed to be. These guys needed to make money, and girls, you know, needed to make money, or else sometimes he would work them too hard. So, but yeah, he was really, in that respect, very much like, you know, a jazz musician moving from this project to the next project and just forming whatever he needed, you know, to, you know, find that core sound and to complement what he was doing.
Yeah. I had Luke on the show, and he was talking about the period of time when he was producing Jeff, and they were at the Astoria, David Gilmour's houseboat, doing some recording stuff, and he could kind of tell that Jeff was pulling away from that project, and at that point he had already discovered Prodigy and some other things, and he had a foot out the door into other things. Was that something that you kind of, as your trace, because I think you guys would be experts on kind of having a chronological order of how he moved through those different phases. Was there anything that you could share, or something that you found particularly interesting about how he was moving from these different things? Sometimes it seemed like they were worlds apart, but then you listen to him and you go, well, there's definitely a through line because it's Jeff, but it's like, how did he make the connection between the fusion stuff and the techno stuff, and then like the Crazy Legs thing, and then the soundtrack that he did a really cool soundtrack in the early 90s, Frankie's House. That was good. So that was about however you like. I'm just curious about what you guys have.
Well, the 90s was, I mean, I wrote some of that chapter, and that was really frustrating because it was so back and forth, you know, going between this rockabilly project to, you know, moving forward with Roger Waters, you know, so he's like, he's, you know, forging ahead with this guitar shop sound, but at the same time, he's pulling back to his early days as a kid, you know, with this rockabilly thing, which is always a passion of his, and it really took him about 12, 13 years to finally indulge that. So there was a bit of a push and pull thing always going on with Jeff, and how do you make sense of this, you know? And that's, you just have to draw these lines out. It's kind of, he has these underlying ideas that are there, and just when he gets the opportunity, he takes them. And then something like Roger Waters, you know, that helps pay the bills and also keeps him creatively stimulated. With Lukather was an interesting situation, because I spoke with Luke actually several times back in the day when Luke was in the midst of working on the record, and I went back to those interviews, and we, you know, so you have his perspective from then when he was in the midst of it all in the book. And you know, Lukather, I think that the problem with Lukather, according to Jeff, was that Luke loved everything Jeff did, and how could you not? You know, you listen to it and it's like, it's beyond everything else out there. But to Jeff, it's like, you know, it's 99% rubbish, you know. And Jeff was really critical of the whole thing, and he just wasn't feeling the direction that things were going in. And I think he felt like it was a little bit of a retread, of a, you know, regression. You know, back to his fusion days, and he didn't really want to go back there. He wasn't quite comfortable with that just yet, and I think that's what Luke was kind of pushing with him, with, you know, a lot of these LA jazz guys that were backing him up and everything, and Jeff just wasn't feeling that. And of course, this was the time of the electronica explosion that was going on, you know, in the late 90s, and it was becoming much more popular. It was becoming pop music, especially over in England. And Prodigy in particular was topping the charts both in the US and the UK. And I think Jeff, he got excited about that. It reminded him of like The Who. You know, it's like these guys have this energy that, and Jeff loved energy. You know, he loved high energy stuff, music that makes you bounce off the walls. And I think he decided, you know what, this other stuff, I'm not feeling that bounce, that I'm not feeling motivated. This music has got me going. It's new sounds, it's new production, you know, and everything. And he kind of floundered with it, to be honest. I think the first album, you know, he didn't quite go in the direction, because it's interesting. I was listening to it while I was working on the record, and it's funny because I was working for Digidesign, you know, the Pro Tools company, doing artist relations. So I knew the Chemical Brothers, and when I went over to interview Jeff in '99, I went to go see the Chemical Brothers debut some new tracks for their album at a dance club. And I was listening to the Chemical Brothers album that came out at the same time as Jeff Beck's album, and I realized, you know what? It doesn't have the bass. It doesn't have the bottom end. It doesn't have the kick. You know, the rhythms are too complicated, you know, and Jeff was really approaching it like a guitar player, you know, and then the next two albums, he finally catches on and gets there. But you know, I think he really loved the new sounds, and I think on the second album he really went out there. He brings the ring modulator in, you know, his guitar sounding much more electronic, you know, and more synth-like and everything. And so I think he got into it and grew with it. And then of course he did the third album, and then he decided, I'm done with this, on to the next thing, you know.
Yeah. As you guys have talked, okay.
To sort of address your original question too, about you know, from the outside world, Jeff's career sort of looks a little chaotic as he, you know, pushes and pulls between different things and goes to and fro. And I think that was really one of the most important ideas, or the thing that Chris and I were very cognizant of, and what you'll find out from the book is that what looks from the outside like a bit of chaos, there's rationale for almost everything that he does.
Yeah, that reminds me, because there was that he talks about that album that him and Jimmy Page listened to in the early '60s by these Dutch electronic artists, you know, and like he was saying even back in like 1960, you know, Jimmy Page and I were listening to this stuff, so this wasn't really new to us, you know, so it was always there, just like the rockabilly was always there, you know. It wasn't just some newfangled, you know, I'm just going to chase some fad or something like that. He had a passion for these things.
And I do think that when you read the book, it'll start all making sense. Yeah. Like a big question I had was, for example, like, how did he go from the first edition of the Jeff Beck group, which is basically a hard rock metal band, or proto-metal band, to the funk of the second Jeff Beck group? I mean, they're so completely different approaches in different bands. And there's like a really fascinating, like, 2-year story of how he got from one place to the other place. And it took a couple of years, really, including a car accident that almost kills him. And yet another record that he recorded with Motown that ended up, you know, him tossing aside for many reasons. So there are these complex stories, and as Chris mentioned, you know, these underlying currents that go underground for a bit, but then reemerge. So you're like, how did he end up all of a sudden getting into electronic music?
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's because it was always there since 1966 that he's been fascinated by it, and he finally saw an opportunity to indulge in it.
Yeah, and you see a string. It's like between that Tom Disselvelt and Kid Belltown record in the early '60s through to the fusion years with Jan Hammer, you know, and especially There and Back. You know, it's like, you know, there's a one track, the one track, which name I forget right now, but you know, it sounds like it could have been a Gary Newman hit almost, you know, and you know, at that same period, he's exploring guitar synthesizers. He was one of the first guys to use a guitar synthesizer. You know, and so it wasn't that much of a stretch for him to go off and do the electronica thing like he did in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, with the influx of guys like Max Middleton and Bernard, you can kind of see where the funk thing would happen. But I'm kind of interested about you touched on the Motown thing, and is that the period of time where he plays on Stevie's record, Stevie plays, and then Because We've Ended as Lovers comes around? Is that the kind of period that we're... early 70s?
No, actually, it takes a minute. It takes a minute to get there, and that is, it's a lot. It ends up being a large part of the book. Yeah. Is that, he's playing this with Rod Stewart with the first edition of the Jeff Beck group. He's playing this hard rock metal thing. Yeah. And then he gets into this car accident. And the car accident is really a turning point for him. He splits his head open. Takes him a year to recuperate. And during that time, he can't really stand loud music anymore. And all he's really listening to is Motown. Yeah. And so he's like, I don't want to do this heavy metal thing. I don't want to be chasing Led Zeppelin. I don't want to be chasing Deep Purple. I'm not a heavy metal guy. I'm an R&B guy. I love black music, I love, Motown, Stax, that kind of thing. And he loves Stevie Wonder. Stevie Wonder is one of those musicians that he just, worshipped. So he makes this hard turn and decides he's going to do something over at Motown, and I'll leave that for people to read about, because there's a bunch of brand new stuff in there that I don't think has ever been talked about. I actually was able to get hold of one of the engineers that worked on that session, and he talked to us about that. Yeah. But from then on, he's like, nah, I'm not a heavy metal boy. I'm more into the R&B and funk side of things, and how can I take what I do and bring it into that world? Yeah. And that's really what the Jeff Beck the second edition of the Jeff Beck group is all about. Yeah. Was him. He finds this bass player, Clive Shaman, who sounds a lot like Jamerson, and he gets a black singer, which is interesting because nobody ever talks about this. That Jeff played in one of the, it's not the first, but one of the first integrated rock bands. He doesn't get real credit for that. And from that sort of funk foundation, it slowly starts evolving into what we get as, eventually as Blow by Blow and Wired and some of the fusion-y kind of things.
Yeah. David Gilmour had mentioned on his most recent album that he needed to kind of clear the deck and have a producer that was going to push it in a direction that he was uncomfortable with, maybe, or just not be sycophantic and say everything, a huge fan, somebody that was going to challenge him and say, hey, do we have to have a long solo on everything, or why does there have to be a fade out on every song? And I was curious, did Jeff ever have anybody in this? I think I know the answer, that he probably didn't have anybody that was guiding him, but maybe from what you were saying, Chris, when he had Luke producing him, he was needing somebody to kind of kick him in the ass a little bit and get him out of the comfort zone and trying new things. He seemed to be a very self-starter in that way, but was there anybody that he ever had in his corner? Maybe Tony Hymas at some point was, I don't know. I'm curious.
Yeah, Tony is a very important overlooked actor in Jeff's career. He comes along at a very crucial point in his career, thanks to Simon Phillips, with There and Back. And, basically he helps rescue this tour that they had in Japan with Stanley Clarke, where, basically Jeff wanted to bring Max Middleton, but Stanley couldn't stand Max. And so he brought along, the David Bowie keyboard player, Garson. Yeah. Brings him in, and they clash, and everything like that. And then Simon suggests, I know this guy, Tony Hymas, he's perfect. And Tony Hymas was more than just perfect for the gig. He was perfect for Jeff as a foil, because Tony did, give Jeff a critical ear. Jeff would play something, and Tony would say, like, yeah, that's good, but, you can do better. You know,
Tony was a very sophisticated musician.
Very sophisticated musician, and it's very funny to read just some of the quotes from him, because it's just because he is so serious, and he's not, you know, he wasn't obsessed with Jeff at all. In fact, there was like a great story that you can read in the book about Tony's track that ends up on the Flash album, where it's like, my gosh, he probably hadn't even heard it, you know, for like 25 years. He didn't even bother to listen to it at all, you know, and that's really funny. But yeah, he really became this spark, you know, and that of course led to the Guitar Shop album, and then they, you know, even that first electronica album, Tony played a key part in that, even though Tony initially wasn't into that kind of thing at all. Yeah. But you know, Jeff kind of threw the baton at him, and he came back with some stuff that Jeff's like, yeah, that's what I'm looking for.
Well, I think also, you know, you have to look at somebody like George Martin, too, who, you know, George wasn't really a ball buster or anything,
right?
But I think just the gravitas of his presence made Jeff really think seriously about what he was presenting. Like he didn't want to come up with just any old garbage, you know, because this was George Martin, for God's sake.
Yeah.
Not only had George produced the Beatles, but George also produced one of Jeff's favorite records, which was a record called Apocalypse by the Mahavishnu Orchestra.
Yeah.
And Jeff just really respected John McLaughlin and Mahavishnu. And so he, I think, was on his best behavior, trusted George's judgment, which it's hard to say whether Jeff trusted almost any other musician's judgment.
No, yeah, that's part of it too, and it's interesting. I was just thinking as we were talking, because it's like, you know, it's really fascinating that Jeff had recorded at Chess Studios, Sun Studios, Motown, almost at Stax, you know, Abbey Road. I mean, these places that are just known as Air Studios, these iconic studios that he worked at, and yet sometimes the results that he got there wasn't what he expected. You know, sometimes they were great, other times it was kind of a disappointment or a struggle for him. But I think that was part of it too, is that, you know, he didn't always find the proper producer, and later on he was really more into producing himself, which was fine. He'd earned the right to do that towards the latter part of his career. But I think he did kind of need, you know, in addition to being his own worst critic, though, he needed somebody to kind of tell him that, yeah, you need to dial this back or whatever. And I think that's kind of interesting with Wired, because I think with Blow by Blow, you know, George Martin definitely had everything pretty well under control for the most part. With Wired, it starts to unravel. And Jeff, you know, falls behind schedule, and he only has half of the album finished. And George Martin's already committed to do this album with America, so he has to take off, and Jeff continues on his own. And he just kind of goes a little bit overboard with indulging himself in fixing this part up and fixing that part up. And there's a, you know, great story that George Martin tells that, you know, Jeff calls me up one day and says, like, you know, I was thinking about in Goodbye Pork Pie Hat that maybe I should modulate here and everything like that. And Martin's like, Jeff, the album's been out already for 2 weeks.
That ship has sailed, my friend.
It's like, it's too late. The album's done. You know?
Well, you know, too, I'm just thinking as well to your point, John, is that at one point, while he's recording with Booger and Appice, they bring in Jimmy Miller to produce. Jimmy Miller, the great producer who did the Stones and did Traffic and was considered to be, you know, at the time, one of the greats. And he ends up not clicking with Jimmy because he doesn't feel like Jimmy is pushing him enough. You know, he feels that, you know, he wanted somebody to participate and really, you know, help him sort out, you know, what was great and what was going to stand the test of time. That's the thing, you know, like it's interesting because, you know, we all know Jeff was capable of creating magic at any moment. But, you know, his licks were his licks. Yeah. You know, and he knew them inside out and backwards. And he knew when he was coming up with something interesting, and knew when he was just recycling. Okay, and he really wanted somebody to be as critical as he was of that. He wanted to create not just a solo that was going to last the test of time.
Yeah.
And look, you have to be a tough guy to stand up to Jeff Beck and say, hey, Jeff, that wasn't the best.
Yeah. To your point about Jeff wanting to surpass a vocalist or to one up it, the first thing that comes to mind, one of many, but if you guys are familiar with the tune "What God Wants" Part 1 on the Roger Waters "Amused to Death," there's a phrase that Jeff plays, and it's this melody where it's similar to "Where Were You" with the hitting a harmonic and playing the melody by using the bar. It's as sublime as any vocal thing you'll ever hear one of the best R&B singers say. I can hear it in a loop in my head, just that little phrase, and there's things like that when I think of Jeff, of course I think of him as the greatest electric guitar player for me personally, but he superseded the instrument. And I've used this quote a few times and now I've kind of forgotten who it's from, but I think it was George Harrison speaking about Ravi Shankar, is that when Ravi, however you say it, when he walked into the room, he was music. And it just so happened that he was playing an instrument, but he personified the music. And that's what I got from Jeff, is that Jeff was music, and he was just, the guitar was, he would just pick up a guitar, whether it was in tune or not, and make it work. Luke always talks about, did you ever see Jeff use a tuner? Did you ever see him tune his guitar? He said, I would pick up his guitar and it was wildly out of tune, then he would pick it up and just play magic. He had perfect intonation. So the gift that he had was, it seemed like it superseded the instrument itself. It was something beyond the guitar.
Chris Drea of the Yardbirds, we had a great interview with him for the book, and which I'm so happy about, because that we got a chance to chat with him, because he passed away recently. But he said even in the Yardbirds, Jeff would never tune his guitar before he walked on stage. Yeah. He would just start playing, and as he was playing, he would just, tweak the notes in tune, or just be tuning while he's playing. It was, but he said, but at the same time, he never heard him play an out-of-tune note, which is crazy.
Yeah, I've seen him play numerous times where it's like sometimes he'll do like this sort of Cliff Gallup lick, and he's actually tuning the guitar, because it's just like, but he makes it seem like he's just fiddling around, or he's just like, he's doing like this little chromatic thing or whatever like that, and then he'll bend a note with the tuner, but he's actually tuning up,
Dude, you know what? It's funny. This has nothing to do with Jeff Beck, but it just reminds me of something that was funny. I think I was in high school or something. I mean, I was pretty young. I went to see the Allman Brothers on Brothers and Sisters tour, and the Allman Brothers used to have these breaks where they would be like just making spacey sounds, like you'd hear the cymbals like, and you just hear this sort of atmospheric thing that would bridge some of the songs together. And I was sitting there listening to it, and all of a sudden I realized, you know what? These guys are just tuning. They're just tuning their instruments, but they want to make it sound cool, so they're putting it into this sort of, it just hit me as a kid, like, they aren't creating spacey Pink Floyd sounds just for the heck of it. They're actually figuring out an entertaining way to tune their instruments.
Yeah, and it's the best kind of tuning, because it's the group tuning. It's tuning to one another and making, wherever that drifts from 440, if it's above or below, it doesn't matter. It's much like group time. There's a group tuning and what sounds good, and but you only get that from a lifetime of playing together.
True.
Seems like. Yeah. That experience. Yeah, this has been super fun. I can't believe so much time has flown by. I'm dying to get the book, and you guys are wonderful to talk to. It's great to meet you because you're heroes also from me being a 12-year-old kid. I mean, I'm 61 now, but I've been playing for 40 some odd years. So yeah, it's been a thrill to see your ride over the years of, in all the different magazines and such. So really looking forward to it.
We're old, but we all look pretty good. We all seem to be doing okay, right?
Yeah, we're doing okay. Music keeps us young, keeps us out there playing and talking about music. And yeah, it's a thrill to get to do this kind of thing and, share our stories. And
okay, talk us up, John. Make sure you help us sell a bunch of books.
Absolutely. Well, what I'll do is I'm also the Woodshed Guitar Experience is a sponsor. So what I'll be doing for the next year's clips is I'll also have a little blurb at the beginning of the thing to make sure to pick up the new book. So if you could provide a link of some kind of where folks can get it. Because I didn't get that information from Michelle as to where people can find the book and all that kind of stuff. But I know that there's every guitar player that I know, Jeff is at the top of the list. So, I mean, think of all the birthdays and, Father's Day's passed, but birthdays and Christmas, this will be an amazing gift. So it's I'm excited to know that you guys put it out because I know for a fact that you've got the inside scoop, as far as the decades of knowing Jeff and spending time with Jeff. So you guys are perfect.
And I will tell you, Chris Gill was dogged in his persistence to get every last fact right.
He strikes me as somebody that's very tenacious.
And for guitar nerds, I want to just put this out there. Like when they auctioned off Jeff's guitars.
Yeah.
Chris was the guy that they talked to make sure that they got all the information right.
Oh, nice.
Not anybody in Jeff's camp.
Yeah, Chris is the clearinghouse for all the vital information, the stats, the inside baseball of Jeff Beck.
Well, yeah, I think you'll get a lot of inside baseball in this book. That's it's exciting to me to do these interviews with people that we did, because obviously Jeff was being gone and everything like that, we couldn't talk to him anymore. I got a lot out of him. I was the two great things out of this book was going back through my old tapes with Jeff because I had hours of tapes with Jeff, talks with Jeff. My first interview with him was over 3 hours long, and we covered not just the Frankie's House and the Crazy Legs records, which I was there to talk about, but I also got to indulge in some questions about Blow by Blow and Guitar Shop and Truth and so on. And so to go back and dig through that, and it's like, oh my gosh, I missed this thing. Even on the Roger Waters album, there's a great little story that he told. Actually, a couple great little stories that it's like, oh, wow, this is really good, because I didn't really interview him about that album. But he told me some great stuff that was perfect to tell that story. So there's a lot of that. And then talking with someone like Simon Phillips he was a wealth of unheard of information. There was an entirely unheard of album that they worked on in the early 80s that I never saw in any of the other books out there or any interviews or anything. And it's a hilarious story on top of it all. It's really entertaining and funny and so 80s at the same time. I think people really enjoy that. So that was the great thing for me, was to indulge that, to learn something about Jeff that I never knew before. Yeah. And Brad and I, we went through everything. I mean, we had our own interviews. We went through all the interviews that had been done that we could find. We went through these books. And that's the thing, was to draw this line and not to just, there's a lot of books out there that are just, Jeff did this, Jeff did that, then he did this, and you read that and your mind starts to, you just go, oh my gosh, this is just, there's a bunch of factoids. And, you don't really need to know every session he did, because a lot of times that was just a quick buck for Jeff, and it didn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. And this was like to really tell that story about Jeff. Where was he going? What was his focus? Where was his mind at? And to get inside of Jeff's mind was really a fascinating place to be for about 3 years. So frustrating at times, but fascinating too.
Yeah, I heard he had a delightful sense of humor. And that's one of my favorite things in any musician or any guitar friend, is knowing that they have a great sense of humor is always a plus for me.
Well, this is a funny thing because when we did the photo shoot for, it's the Guitar Player April 1993 issue, he's dressed up in this Knights, the round table outfit, and he's playing the Stratocaster with a sword. And it's so funny because the photographer was there, and he was talking about something in Enemy or Sounds or something like that, where this band kind of did this, this photo shoot in costumes. So wouldn't it be great? And just like, he comes into the studio, because this is where he was, actually we went to the studio where he was doing Muddy Water Blues, going to record that day, and we did the photo shoot there as well. And Jeff's like, I was just at a fancy dress party and I have this Knights outfit. I think that'd be great to wear. And what people don't know about that photo is he's wearing like one of those Frankie Goes to Hollywood style t-shirts underneath, but it says like, Nigel says this goes to 11.
Yeah, that's the other added treat, was that the whole Spinal Tap thing.
Yeah. And Jeff loved every second of that. The fact that he was being spoofed, it thrilled him to no end.
Yeah, he's had a very self-deprecating wit and humor and all that. I love about a musician that doesn't take themselves too seriously.
True.
So, there's a level that's accept, but you can tell over the years when you're reading interviews with folks, those that take themselves maybe a tad too serious.
Yeah, well, it's funny with Jeff. I just Carla Olson just reached out to me via Instagram and said, like, did Jeff ever tell you the story about Jimi Hendrix saying that Jeff was his favorite player? And I said, no, Jeff would never say that kind of thing. Jeff was never one to like kind of do this offhanded brag thing, like, oh yeah, well, Jimi Hendrix said that I was his favorite guitar player. Jeff would never say that. Jeff would say something like, Jimi Hendrix thought I sucked really bad, and that just depressed me for 5 years, and I couldn't pick up an instrument, or something.
Yeah, I've told this a few times, but it's funny when I would do interviews with Jeff.
Well, thank you so much for tuning in. A huge thanks to Chris Gill and Brad Tolinski for joining me and giving us an incredible look inside Blow by Blow. It's a fitting tribute to Jeff Beck's remarkable life, artistry, and lasting legacy, and I highly recommend adding it to your collection. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your guitar lovers in your life. You can also follow the Guitar Hang Podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all major podcast platforms. And once again, don't miss the Woodshed Guitar Experience, one of the best opportunities anywhere to improve your playing while connecting with an amazing guitar community. That's woodshedguitarexperience.com. And check out the promo code GuitarHang300 to save $300 on the admission price. Thanks for listening. I'm Jon Stankorb. Until next time, thanks so much.